Good morning, everybody. This is Stephen Pugh of the Home Bible College. It's September the 19th and we're looking at Philippians chapter 3, one of my favourite passages, where Paul talks about his prize, which is Christ. But let me tell you what my password is first of all, and we'll start there. My password is found in verse 7. And let me read it to you. He says, "But what things were gain to me, those I counted loss for Christ." And you may say, well, what are the things that were gain? Well, let me explain what those things were that were gain to Paul in the Jewish religion. First of all, 7 things. First of all, he says, I was circumcised on the 8th day. Now, not everyone was circumcised on the 8th day, but the very strict Jews did this exactly as commanded. He had the right. The right. He also was of the people of Israel. The AV says that he was of the stock of Israel. In other words, it was his breeding. Paul was very proud of his Jewish heritage, and his Jewish heritage was his genealogy that went right back to Abraham. Very proud of that. He felt that he was of the aristocracy. He also, number 3, was of the tribe of Benjamin. Now, this was the favoured tribe. It was the tribe of his namesake, King Saul. It was the tribe of that son that was much loved, Benjamin, the youngest son. He also says in verse 4, I'm a Hebrew of the Hebrews. Now, he was proud of his ability to speak perfect Hebrew. He was a Hebrew of the Hebrews. And not all Jews spoke Hebrew. Many spoke Aramaic and Greek and Latin and many other languages, but he was taught Hebrew, and he was taught it correctly, and he was very proud as a Jew of being able to speak Hebrew correctly. We must not underestimate the pride that a Jew has in this wonderful ability. Number 5, he says, in regard to the law, a Pharisee. So he was of a particular theological sect in which they had pretty well the correct interpretation of the law. It was the very best of Judaism. Paul was proud of that, very proud of that. He'd graduated from the best university under the very best rabbi. Paul was proud of that. Verse number 6, as for zeal, I was a persecutor of the church. Paul felt that the persecution to death of Christians was in fact the very highest level of service for God. He was absolutely, completely ignorant of what he was doing, and because of that he received mercy. And lastly, he says, as for legalistic righteousness, I was faultless. The word should be blameless. Nobody could point a finger at Paul and say, look what you just did. Paul was very careful. As a law-abiding Jew, nobody could point the finger to him, and before men and before God in the flesh, that is, he was righteous before God. However, Paul says, but what things were gain to me, those I count loss for Christ. And he could not have Christ until those things were counted loss. Nobody can come under grace unless they put law on the trash heap. Now, this is very offensive. This is very offensive for anybody that's a law-abiding Jew, or for Christians who have such a great respect for Old Covenant and Judaism. But that's what Paul says, and we mustn't hide from the force of what Paul is saying. Let me read on. He says, yea, without doubt, I count all things loss for the excellency of the knowledge of Christ Jesus my Lord, for whom I have suffered the loss of all things, and do count them as dung, that I might win Christ. Now we mustn't lose the force of this argument. Paul says, I take each of these 7 bags of Judaism. They're black bags, they're bin bags, and they're going to go to the rubbish tip. They're going to go to the dunghill. I count them as human excrement, that I might gain Christ. Everything about the flesh, everything about himself, everything about his law-keeping would disqualify him from grace if he claimed any honour in these regards. So he says, I take these 7 bin bags of Judaism and I put them firmly on the dunghill. What does Paul discover when he gets to the dunghill? He discovers that on the dunghill is the grace of God. You see, the grace of God reaches down into the depths of this world, and it touches men who are sitting on the dunghill of life. Let me read on. I have suffered the loss of all things that I may win Christ, and do count them but dung, that I may win Christ, and be found in him, not having mine own righteousness, which is of the law. So there was a righteousness of the law. It's just that it was a failing righteousness. It was a righteousness done in the energy of the flesh. And although God has respect for that and will bless men for that, nevertheless it cannot bring him into grace. So, not having mine own righteousness, which is of the law, but that righteousness which is by faith of Christ, the righteousness which is of God by faith. And then verse 10, that I might know him, and the power of his resurrection, and the fellowship of his sufferings, being made conformable unto his death, if by any means I might attain unto the resurrection of the dead. Wow. So Paul understands law and grace. He understands the contrast, and he takes of all of the 7 things of his Jewish heritage and he puts them in the trash. Why? That he might discover grace. You see, you cannot have grace while you're claiming privilege. You cannot have grace while you're claiming your own righteousness. But when you put your own righteousness in the trash, then you become a candidate for God's unmerited favour, the special kindness of God, in which he gives his blessing to us freely and without reserve, based not upon what you've done, but based upon what Christ has done. Now that's something to think about. God bless you. Look forward to speaking to you all again tomorrow. Have a wonderful day. Bye for now.